Good afternoon. Today, the Supreme Court has judged that the Rwanda policy requires a set of changes in order to be lawful. I do not agree with this decision, but I respect it and accept it. The rule of law is fundamental to our democracy. We have prepared for all outcomes of this case, and so we have been working on a new international treaty with Rwanda. This will provide a guarantee in law that those who are relocated from the UK to Rwanda will be protected against removal from Rwanda, and it will make clear that we will bring back anyone if ordered to do so by a court. We will finalise the treaty in light of today's judgment and ratify it without delay. But we need to end the merry-go-round. I said I was going to fundamentally change our country, and I meant it. So I'm also announcing today that we will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation. This will enable Parliament to confirm that with our new treaty, Rwanda is safe. It will ensure that people cannot further delay flights by bringing systemic challenges in our domestic courts and stop our policy being repeatedly blocked. But of course, we must be honest about the fact that even once Parliament has changed the law here at home, we could still face challenges from the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. I told Parliament earlier today that I'm prepared to change our laws and revisit those international relationships to remove the obstacles in our way. So let me tell everybody now, I will not allow a foreign court to block these flights. If the Strasbourg court chooses to intervene against the expressed wishes of Parliament, I am prepared to do what is necessary to get flights off. I will not take the easy way out, because I fundamentally do not believe that anyone thinks the founding aims of the European Convention on Human Rights was to stop a sovereign parliament removing illegal migrants to a country deemed to be safe in parliamentary statute and binding international law. And I do not believe that we are alone in that interpretation. Across Europe, other governments are following our lead. Italy, Germany, Austria are all exploring models like ours. Indeed, the UNHCR operates its own refugee scheme in Rwanda. And unlike the UK, they don't have a treaty for any of this. We are a reasonable government, and this is a reasonable country. But the British people's patience can only be stretched so thin, and they expect the boats to be stopped. That is why I made it one of my 5 priorities. And whatever our critics might say, we are making progress. Because the Rwanda scheme is only one part of our strategy. Last December, the number entering the UK illegally in small boats had more than quadrupled in just 2 years. Since then, this year, they are down by a third, even as the numbers entering the rest of Europe have soared, with illegal crossings of the Mediterranean up by 80%. We're ending the farce of taxpayers footing the bill to put illegal migrants in hotels, with 50 closures announced already, returning them to local communities. Illegal working raids are up by almost 70%, and we have made over 5,000 arrests this year. We've concluded returns and cooperation agreements with France, Bulgaria, Turkey, Italy, Georgia, and Albania. We've cut the legacy initial asylum backlog by almost 2/3, and in total, we've returned over 20,000 illegal migrants this year. The facts are clear. This government has done more and delivered more than any government in the last 5 years to tackle illegal migration. But to fully solve this problem, the Rwanda policy is a necessary deterrent. That's why it's important that the Supreme Court has today confirmed that the principle of removing asylum seekers to a third safe country is lawful, because it means that when we have addressed the Supreme Court's concerns, people will know that if they come here illegally, they will not get to stay, and so they will stop coming altogether. That is how we will stop the boats. In recent years, many people have lost faith in politicians' ability to do the things they said they would do. They fear that politicians are more interested in grandstanding than delivering for the British people. I've been determined to change that, to deliver on the commitments that I make. I committed at the start of this year to halve inflation. Back then, inflation was 10.7%. But new figures released this morning by the Office of National Statistics show that inflation is now 4.6%. I'm not saying the job is done. Many people have struggled and continue to struggle. We must stay the course until inflation returns to target. But it shows that when I said we would halve inflation, I meant it. When I said I would stop the boats, I meant it. Today's judgment has not weakened my resolve, it has only hardened it, and we will deliver that too. Thank you. We'll take some questions from the media briefly. Can I start with the BBC?
Thank you, Chris Mason at BBC News. Let's cut to the quick, Prime Minister. You gave your Home Secretary the heave-ho on Monday. The court has shredded your Rwanda plan today. It's a total shambles, isn't it?
Chris, if you look at the track record of our policy tackling illegal migration, as I said earlier, we've done more in the last year to tackle illegal migration and to stop the boats than any government has done in years. The numbers of people coming here this year are down by a third. The number of illegal migration raids up by 70%. New deals with half a dozen countries. We've returned 20,000 people. We've made thousands of arrests, all while the numbers in Europe are getting worse. So that actually shows that when I said we would stop the boats when I made that speech in January, we are delivering. We're making strong progress. But in order to finish the job, in order to get the job done, we need the Rwanda deterrent to work. And that is why we've been preparing thoroughly, carefully, for all outcomes today. That's why we've already got a treaty that is virtually ready to go, which we will finalise in light of today's judgment. And that will provide everybody with the assurances they need. And indeed, the court today made recommendations. We will meet all those challenges with our new treaty. And then Parliament will have the chance to demonstrate unequivocally that Rwanda is safe for these purposes and in compliance with all our obligations. So not only have we made great progress this far, we will get the job done, and that involves the new treaty and new domestic legislation, and that will clear the remaining barriers to us getting flights off as planned in the spring of next year. Can I next turn to ITV?
Anushka Astana, ITV News. Prime Minister, your party Vice Chair Lee Anderson says ignore the law, just put the planes in the air and send them to Rwanda. You have just made clear that you respect the law. So will you sack him, or do you understand where he's coming from? And if no one is sent to Rwanda before the next election, will you admit that you failed?
Well, I think what Lee's comments, and indeed the comments of others, do is reflect the strength of feeling in the country on this issue. And I absolutely share, actually, in the frustrations that my colleagues and indeed people across the country have about this issue. Right? And everyone should understand the strength of feeling. And that's why I made stopping the boats one of my 5 priorities. It was right that it's one of the 5 priorities. It's one of this country's top priorities. And people are frustrated by what they see as repeated challenges to Parliament's ability to get this done. Now, as I said, we've made good progress. I want people to take heart from the fact that for the first time since small boats became a thing in this country, we have reduced the numbers by a third this year. Thanks to all the work that has been done over the past year, all the agreements, all the extra deterrence, all the illegal working raids, the arrests, as I said, all of that means that we've made progress. But we do need to get the job done. And that's why I was clear in Parliament, and I've been clear here today, that once we have this new treaty, and once Parliament endorses it and declares that Rwanda is safe for these purposes, and we meet all our obligations, then my patience has run thin, as I did believe the country's patience has run thin, and that's why we'll take all the necessary steps to ensure that we can remove any further blockages to us getting this policy executed and getting planes leaving as planned in the spring of next year. Next to Times Radio.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Kate McCann from Times Radio. Your own Home Office has said that it identified, and I quote, some concerns with Rwanda's human rights record around political opposition to the current regime, dissent and freedom of speech. We've looked at the country conditions and assessed that Rwanda is generally a safe country for asylum seekers and refugees. How can Parliament be certain that Rwanda is a safe country if your own Home Office isn't certain? And can you guarantee that a plane will leave before the next general election?
Well, Kate, when it comes to the Home Office, has actually published a notice earlier this year which gave a full country guidance on Rwanda and explained the decision that it had reached and the assessment that it had made that it was safe for these purposes. But it's not just the Home Office that came to that conclusion. It's also important to remember that in the Court of Appeal, the most senior justice, the Lord Chief Justice, agreed with the government that we had sought and received the appropriate assurances from Rwanda about this particular issue that has been raised and the Supreme Court talked about today of onward refoulement. And furthermore, again, reminding everyone that Rwanda is recognised globally for its record in welcoming migrants, including over 500 people that were evacuated from Libya under the EU's emergency mechanism, working in partnership with the United Nations. In fact, the United Nations High Commissioner said that he really wanted to thank the government of Rwanda for what they had done. And the refugee country plan from the United Nations said that thanks to the generosity of the Rwandan government and the Rwandan people, evacuees from Libya can enjoy a good protection environment and get access to essential humanitarian assistance services. So look, those are the statements from the United Nations previously. We've had our own assessment, but as I said, our new treaty will put into binding law the assurances that everybody, including the Supreme Court, needs to make sure that people can be certain that when we send someone to Rwanda, they won't be incorrectly returned to their own country if that was problematic for them. And when we do that, Parliament will have a chance to support that point of view. And at that point, as I said, a sovereign parliament has declared, or will have declared unequivocally, that Rwanda is safe for these purposes. It fulfills all our obligations under the various different obligations that we have, because there are multiple. And in doing so, at that point, I do not expect there to be any more domestic barriers to us getting this policy working and planes leaving the UK.
So you can guarantee one before the next election?
As I said, we are working extremely hard to make sure that we can get a plane off as planned in the spring. Next, can I turn to the Daily Mail?
Thanks, PM. Jesse Gross from the Daily Mail. We've had a lot of talk and a lot of legislation from quite a lot of PMs on this issue, and you're offering more of the same today. I mean, to return to Kate's question, I mean, people's patience has worn thin. Can you give us a guarantee today that you will get those flights off before the election? Because you do have options, and at the moment it looks like it's all going to get stuck in the courts again.
Well, what I'd say, Jason, is look, I understand people's frustrations. I'm incredibly sympathetic to them. I think the current system is both unfair and unsustainable, whether it's the farce of illegal migrants taking up hotels in local communities and costing taxpayers millions of pounds, whether it's just the base unfairness of some people jumping the queue, breaking the rules, exploiting our generosity, and, by the way, meaning that we can't apply our compassion and generosity to those who most need it. None of that is right. And people are needlessly dying. Innocent people are dying when they're making these illegal crossings. So they're being exploited by gangs. Any which way you look at it, the current system is not defensible, which is why it's one of my priorities to stop the boats. And as I said, we've made more progress in the past year than any government has in any year since this small boats phenomenon came upon us. And I'm confident that we will keep making progress. But getting Rwanda working is an important part of completing the job, having the deterrence effect that we need. And as I said, legislation will help us do that. We are responding to the Supreme Court. As I said, I don't agree with the decision, but I respect it and accept it. Rule of law is fundamental to our democracy. But what we have been doing is negotiating a new treaty with Rwanda that will be legally binding, and that will be ratified both by our parliament and in Rwanda. And alongside that, as I said, we will be introducing emergency, extraordinary legislation so that people cannot further delay flights by bringing systemic challenges in our domestic courts and stop our policy being repeatedly blocked. Right? That is a significant step. Because I said I was going to fundamentally change our country. I'm going to do what it takes to stop the boats. That is going to require extraordinary emergency legislation to remove those barriers. That's what we're going to do. And as I've also made clear today, that if we face future challenges for the European Court of Human Rights, then we need to revisit those relationships, and I will not allow a foreign court to block those flights. It is fundamental to me that we deliver on this priority. Stopping the boats is the country's priority, it's Home Secretary's priority, it's my priority, and we're going to get the job done. And lastly, if I could go to the Daily Express.
Thanks, Prime Minister. So this is Daily Express. Can you be explicit about exactly how you intend to stop European intervention on this matter, because it isn't really clear. And also, we've had two comments, one from former Home Secretary Priti Patel saying that actually the Court of Appeal ruling was explicit in its concerns about this issue, and you should have been able to see that at the time and mitigate against it to prevent this happening. And allies of Suella Braverman say that they try to see it off with action to prevent this as well. So two former Home Secretaries suggesting you should have seen this off months ago. So why didn't you?
Well, lots in there, Sam. Just first of all, we've delivered more in this last year to actually tackle this issue than any government has previously. I'm very proud of our record. Small boats became a phenomenon 4 years ago. For the first time ever this year, under my leadership, the numbers are down. They're not just down by a little, they're down by a third. The number of arrests are in the thousands. The illegal migration rates are up by 70%. We've returned 20,000 people, and for the first time, we're actually now closing hotels, returning them back to local use, saving taxpayers money. So I'm very proud of everything that we've achieved in this past year. I think it's more than anyone has ever done in tackling this issue. But I always said tackling this issue was not easy. When I made the speech in January and I said that stopping the boats was a priority, you asked me then, when exactly, and I said, of all the things I'm going to tackle, this is the hardest. It won't be solved overnight. There's no silver bullet, which is why we have to do all these things, and Rwanda is a part of that, and that's why we will continue to get it done. Now, in terms of the European Court, one of the things that people asked me in January when I made that speech, and similar question, was about Rule 39s. These are these judgments that come from the European Court that have blocked us from doing things in the past. I said then that we were going to engage in a process with the European Court to have reform of how they do that, and on Monday, you may have seen that they concluded that they are going to make significant changes to that process. They are going to have named judges. They're going to make sure that countries can make their representations before they make their determinations. They're going to ensure that they should only be given in exceptional circumstances where there is risk of irreparable harm. So that shows that, by the way, our work on that this year has been successful. Many people thought it wouldn't be, but it has been. So we've already reformed that process. But what I said, I don't think we need to get into the speculation of that now, because I'm confident that what we are doing will meet all our obligations, and I'm confident that once Parliament asserts that will be something that people pay due attention to. But let me just be clear, what I will not do is allow a foreign court to block our ability to get these flights off once a sovereign Parliament has determined in law that Rwanda is a safe country for these purposes and meets all our obligations. And I want to be crystal clear about that, because we will stop the boats, and getting this policy working is vital to doing that, and we will do absolutely everything that is necessary to make that work. Thanks very much.
Can I just quickly ask, do you promise the British public you'll get